Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Intel with Greg Cosell. I'm Jeff Mosher alongside Adam Kaplan. It's the Inside the Birds platform. And of course, when we do the Intel with Greg Cosell, we are having Greg break down his tape evaluations of NFL draft prospects. And in this episode, always a fun one for the fans, Greg, wide receivers. Now, I don't know if your breakdowns and our discussion can top last year's class where you had three guys go top 10. You had Bryant Thomas Jr. really play well being late. You had guys like Ladd McConkey, right? Jaylen McMillan for Tampa Bay. Jalen Coker for the Panthers, a day 3 guy.
Actually not drafted. He wasn't drafted.
That's right. You're right. He wasn't drafted at a Holy Cross. Make some impact. So this year's class, we don't know if it'll be as flashy, but there are definitely some good names that we're going to go through with you on this one. So why don't we start at the top and go with the kid out of Arizona, Tet McMillan, we're going to call him because I can't pronounce his first name. So I'll just say Tet.
That's or T Mac would work too.
T Mac works as well, but there's a lot of those. Right. There's a lot of those in
I know there's a lot of those. Yeah. I got to tell you, I really like this kid, and I think he's a little more than some people might think. Like I'm not suggesting that he's Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase, but I think when you see his size and the fact that he doesn't run great as far as a 40 time, I think the immediate thought with him is, well, he's a possession receiver, that he's Drake London, and I think he's more than that. And in fact, I spoke to a coach who agrees with me 100%. Now, again, there's always many receivers and many different points of view. But McMillan, I mean, he's very smooth. He's certainly not explosive, but he's incredibly smooth. He's got ridiculously good hands. Being 6'4" and 1/8, he has a really wide catching radius. What I think, to me, really stood out and separates him a little bit and makes him a little more than just a big possession receiver is how seamless he was transitioning from receiver to run after catch. And he was very, very good run after catch. So I think there's a little more to his game than just, he's a big possession receiver. And like I said, I don't want to make comparisons because that's all then people think about. But I think that he's potentially closer to one of those main guys as he is to, let's say, a Drake London. I think that there's more to him, that he's more than just a big guy who has great hands.
Okay, so he's a difference maker in your opinion.
I think he can be. Yes.
Okay.
I think you can line him up anywhere in the formation. He can certainly line up at boundary X and be a factor. I guess some people have, I think, made the T. Higgins comparison. I don't know if I feel that that's an exact comparison, but, I think there's a lot of people in the league that would view T. Higgins as a number one receiver. He's obviously on a team where they have a true elite number one receiver, because I think most people would say that Jefferson and Jamar Chase are the two best receivers in football right now. So, but I think McMillan is a little bit more than just a big possession guy, and with a chance to be just what you said, Jeff, a guy that makes an impact.
All right, the next guy on our list is much smaller. I mean, he's not 6'4", but he's a phenomenal college player. That's LutherBurden out of Missouri. Greg, what are your thoughts on his tape?
I got to tell you, I don't understand why I'm seeing LutherBurden's, and again, mock drafts, as we know, mock drafts are just mock guesses. But I think LutherBurden is a big-time prospect. I did him last summer from his 2023 tape. He obviously caught more balls this year. The production was less, but their quarterback situation wasn't quite as good. But this guy's not small. He's 6 feet 206. He ran really well. To me, he's a 3-level player. I mean, he may not have the terrifying speed of a Jamison Williams, that kind of guy, but the tape clearly showed that he can take the top off the defense. He's a vertical dimension both from the slot and outside. He's got quickness. He's got really good run after catch. He's elusive. He's competitively tough. Maybe people see him now as sort of a high-end wide receiver 2 on a team, but I think he can be a high volume target and be a wide receiver 1. I really do. I remember watching him last summer when he caught maybe, I don't know, 80 balls last summer. I can't remember. I think, and he was an All-American last summer, after 2023. I really like this kid. I think, depending on where he goes, this guy could be a number one receiver.
Obviously, with wide receivers, Greg, a lot of this depends on what quarterback and offensive system.
Oh, yeah. Have. Yep.
And what they're asked to do. Is
I'm
Burden.
glad you said that, Jeff. That's a great point. And I'm so glad you said that, because so much is involved with that. That's true pretty much with every skill position. We've talked running backs, and we spoke about Kyron Williams, being a guy that no one thought was that guy coming out of Notre Dame.
Right.
So much. And don't forget, just to play off your point, because it was so good, is now with so much reduced splits and motions, it's not just old school. Oh, well, he's a slot. The game has changed. It's not just, oh, well, he's just a slot. That's all he can do. People line up with reduced splits now. Receivers close to the formation. Look at Puka Nacua, 5th round pick. No one would have thought he'd be a volume target in the NFL. And in fact, the Rams don't really ask him to line up outside the numbers and win one-on-one. They don't really ask him to do that. But yet he's a great player within the context of that offense, a really good player, because he has certain traits that they understand what he is. So I think the point you made is so good.
And by the way, just to finish this point off, Kyron Williams, by the way, was drafted strictly to be a backup. Cam Akers, if you recall, was drafted to be their starter. He was until he got hurt.
Who theoretically has better running traits than Kyron Williams.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, he was a 2nd-round pick. And then you had Darrell Henderson, who was there for a number of years. So kept going down the depth chart, and a guy got a chance. But so much of what happens with these players is who drafts them, how they're going to be used.
Yeah, look at Zay Flowers and Jordan Addison. They both went outside the top 850. They were 20 and 23rd. You paired them with some quarterbacks who could throw the ball, especially what if they were Raiders? What if they were Panthers or Saints? Would they be as
Addison weighed 183, I believe, and the conventional wisdom would be, well, he can't be an outside receiver, but he is an outside receiver. It's so I think it's important, and that's why I loved what you said, to step away from sort of the conventional gospel, so to speak, that, oh, this guy is just this guy is just that, because that's not the way the league is now.
Absolutely. All right. So on that note, where you are and who your quarterback is, I'm very interested to hear what you have to think of Texas's Matt Golden. Because when you talked about quarterbacks, you noted Quinn Ewers' lack of desire to push the ball down the field.
Yeah, Matthew Golden, to me, he's an ascending player. To me, he's this year's Brian Thomas. And not the same kind of receiver. I'm not making a direct comparison in terms of traits, but I think that he's an ascending guy. He ran a 4.29. He doesn't necessarily play at 4.29, but I think he possesses a vertical dimension that can transition to the next level. He's got sudden acceleration. He showed an extra gear with the ball in the air. And that's really what it's about. I remember having this conversation with Mike Quick. It's not about 40 time. It's about having that extra gear when the ball is in the air. That's really the key thing. And I think Golden has shown that. And I really like this kid. He can make catches away from his frame. He has great body control. He's got competitiveness at the catch point. He was a pretty refined route runner too, for a guy that, he played at Texas for one season. He transferred from the University of Houston. He was a 4-star recruit coming out. And he's a guy that, I just think is going to get better and better. And again, I'm not going to sit here and say he's going to be a top 3 receiver in the league, but I think this guy's a really intriguing player.
Adam, I haven't dug into Golden yet. Have you gotten any? Because Greg always says I don't dabble in this, but are there any either medical or character red flags on Matthew Golden?
Not that I know of. I'm expecting him to go before the end of the first round. The 40 time at 4.29 is crazy. I mean, that does matter. 10 matters. Tape is obviously king here, but he's a guy. The only question here is, is he going to be your number one pass target? Is he that kind of guy? Because that kind of dictates if the guy's a first round pick or not.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is, he's 5'11". Greg, does he, the scouting term, does he play bigger than his listed size, or does it matter because he's so fast? That's
well, let's put it this way. He wasn't a small guy. Like, he didn't play like a small guy where you go, this guy's small.
Yeah.
He's 5'11", 191. Obviously, you'd love a guy to be bigger if he's quote unquote a number one. And maybe he's not in a strict sense. But again, that gets back to the discussion we just had. Now it gets down to team and scheme. The point is he can be a volume receiver. I mean, volume receiver, look at Amon-Ra St. Brown. I mean, again, this is the discussion. It's Amon-Ra St. Brown was a 4th round pick. He was in Ben Johnson's offense. He became a big time volume target. He's certainly not as gifted. No one would say, oh, he's got the same traits profile as Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson or A.J. Brown or, those kinds of guys. But yet he's a volume number 1 receiver, so Golden could do that.
All right, Greg, let's go over to the factory of Ohio State. That's wide receivers in the first round, sometimes 2 each year. And we'll talk about Emeka Egbuka.
Which is the perfect transition, Jeff, and you probably didn't even realize it, because I had this conversation with someone about Egbuka, who by the way, is I really like, but this conversation about if you put him in the Lions offense and he replaced Amon-Ra St. Brown, that he could probably do the same thing, because this guy is really refined. He's got a physical presence to him. He really understands route running, the pace and tempo demanded of different releases and routes. He's really got controlled footwork. Not a burner. I don't think there's a 40 time on him, but it doesn't matter because that's not who he is. He's not a vertical guy. I would say, because I watched his tape after the 2022 season, after the 2023 season, and this year. So I've seen Egbuka for 3 straight years. So the strength to me of his game is I watched all of his targets the last 3 years is his subtle, nuanced, detailed understanding of route running to attack different coverages, great pace and tempo, understands leverage, understands how to present a clean throw for the quarterback. I made it a point because he plays like a mature player. So I made it a point to listen to him at the podium at the combine because I just wanted to hear how he talked. Mm-hmm. And he's super mature. Like, you can just tell that this guy views being a receiver as a craft. So I think he's the kind of guy that's going to play in the league for 10 years. But he's another example of team and scheme. He could be a guy that catches 95 balls, or he could be a guy that catches 65 balls. But he's going to be a good player.
So I talked to by the way, he ran a 4.48 at the pro day. So I talked to
by the way, that's very good for him.
Okay. He's not a speed guy. The guy that I spoke with in Area Scout said, you know what? It's a little bit like Greg's saying, but I'll expand a little bit more. So it depends on how you see him. He thinks he's more of a number 2 than number 1. But on Greg's point, if you put him in the Lions offense, Amon-Ra St. Brown's put some mass on his frame. He's gotten stronger physically, but he's still under 6 feet. He's not a speed guy. By the way, Amon-Ra St. Brown was a 4th round pick.
That's correct.
Again, it's the function of the scheme and how they want to deploy the guy, Jeff.
No question. I mean, I think that's Adam just made a great point that follows everything we're talking about. If you just look at Egbuka in a vacuum, in the conventional wisdom of talking about receivers, you'd say he's a number 2. That's what you would say.
Right. Boy, man,
100% right. That's a great point. But it depends on team now. This guy could be a volume receiver depending on the team and scheme.
Well, that's what, these guys can tend to be steals, especially on rookie deals, because they don't go in the top 20. So a lot of times you'll let's say he went to the Saints, right? And let's say Olave and Shaheed are healthy and they get a good, decent quarterback, or Carr's playing well, and you put this guy in the mid. Like I say, you go to a team with 2 good outside receivers and you slide him in to your slot, or you use him like Amon-Ra, and you just added a great weapon to your offense. You're so much more balanced, and you didn't even have to use a top 15 pick on a guy.
It would not surprise me, Jeff, given that there will be some polarizing thoughts on McMillan, Burden, and Golden. That if there aren't some people in the league, I'm talking about evaluators, who have Egbuka as their number 1 receiver, just because he's a mature player that you can put out there and you know what you're going to get, and he's going to be good. What his production is from a fantasy perspective is going to be a function of team, right. But you're going to get quality from this guy. He just knows how to play receiver.
All right. The next guy, Greg, Ayomanor, the Stanford receiver, is fascinating because he's another one. It depends who you speak to, what coach or scout. I know he's been productive. I'm interested to see what your thoughts are for this kid.
Yeah, the reason people are excited about him is he's 6'2", 206, and he can run. And his athletic testing was really, really good. So you're dealing with a guy that has outstanding size. He's got a clear physical presence when you watch the tape. You can just see it. And at times he showed really strong hands to snatch the ball away from his frame. He can catch through contact, especially on those in-breaking routes, which are so prevalent in the league now, like slants, glance routes. But he's kind of tight-hipped and linear, but he can run. He can run in a straight line. So his game is built on his size, his powerful physical presence, and the fact that he can run. That's who he is. Now, there's always a place for that guy in the league. I don't view him, again, now we're getting into, a point of view here. I don't necessarily view him as a volume target in the NFL, but maybe I'll be wrong. But, guys that big with that kind of presence and that kind of straight line speed, people do get excited about it, as Adam just said.
Mm-hmm. I think Eagles fans are still scarred by Stanford receivers from J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. But the difference is here, you said this guy can run, whereas J.J. could not.
He can run. There's no question that he can run.
All right. Let's go over to Iowa State, who's head coach.
Now we're talking.
Yeah, all right. Head coach Matt Campbell, good friend of Nick Sirianni's. Jaden Higgins.
Jaden Higgins he's my bromance in this draft. I watched him last summer and I loved him, and I thought, okay, I think this guy's going to be talked about. And then I watched him again, obviously this year, loved him. While you wouldn't say that he's got high level athleticism and explosiveness, he's so effortless in his movement, and he knows how to separate. And we're dealing with a guy that's 6'4" and an eighth, 214, okay? And again, as Adam said, the 40 time people do look at, and I think people were probably surprised that he ran a 4.47. My guess is people might have thought he'd run a 4.55,
Sure.
But this guy, he's got route refinement at the top of his route stem. Like I said, he knows how to separate. I just think this guy is really, really good. I think he could be a boundary X. Keep in mind, he ran a 4.47 at 6'4" and an 8. Keep in mind, think of someone like Mike Thomas when he had those 3 great years with the Saints, and he was a boundary X. He ran a 4.58. DeAndre Hopkins ran a 4.57 when he came out. You have to be careful about the 40 time. But I really love Jaden Higgins. He catches the ball exceptionally well. He separates. To me, you could put him in the top group in this particular draft class. I would have no problem with that based on his tape.
By the way, Jeff.
Yeah.
Anquan Bolden, right? Because Greg made me think of this. Anquan Bolden's 40 time, depending on who clocked him, was around 4.7.
Yeah.
4.72. I was in the dome when he ran.
Okay. 4.72. Okay. Again, I guess that was his official time. So the bottom line is that's a terrible 40 time. Bill Polian told me at linebacker, I think that the line of demarcation was 4.7. 4.7 or 4.75. Anyway, that he still got drafted in the second round. Now that whoever the GM was for the Cardinals, then that took a lot of gazintas, as they say, So again, with 40 time, you got to be careful. I know it's important. We got to mention it if we have it officially, but you got to go by the tape. By the way, Higgins, I'm told, is really well built. Like he's tall, he's over 6'4", but he's got a lot here. I know Iowa State, you don't look at that school for receivers, but you better start with this kid.
Well, funny you say that, Adam, because there's another wide receiver at Iowa State we were going to ask Greg about, and that's Jaylen Noel. But you can finish off what you were saying about Higgins, Greg.
No, I really think that, and again, I don't know how the league sees him. I think he's a really good prospect. The other kid, though, he's totally different, but he's a really good prospect too. That's Jaylen Noel, 5'10" and a quarter, 194. He ran 4.39. Had a ridiculous vertical jump at 41.5. His testing numbers were off the charts, and his 20-yard shuttle of 4.17 is phenomenal. So, you're dealing with a guy that, again, there's a lot of people that might say slot only. I don't know about that. Again, same conversation. he showed enough inside-outside versatility in college to line up in multiple locations within the formation. You'd love to get him free access off the ball where his route and separation quickness can really be maximized. Now, I will say this, 82 of his 121 targets in 2024 did come from inside, so that's where he's probably most comfortable. But you're dealing with a guy that has sudden lateral twitch. He can work between the numbers in the short to intermediate areas. He's got accelerating speed. You saw him run slot fades and seam routes. He can do all that. He's one of the most intriguing guys as a receiver in this class.
Wow.
He could be. There's kind of a deceptive explosiveness to this kid.
Hey, Jeff, but here's another thing we'll add to him. He benched 23 at 225. He's 23 on the bench for a receiver.
That's one short of my ability, Adam. That's pretty good.
Yeah, is that right? I didn't know that about you. Okay.
Jeff, I think you made a mistake there. I think it was 2.3.
Oh, they're the same thing. It's just a decimal.
Yeah.
Very good.
Good stuff. All right. Jaylen Noel, it's not like he was a household name among the wide receivers. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, Iowa State's got two that could easily go in the top, 70. I mean, again, I'm bad at that. I don't pretend to be a genius at where guys go in the draft.
Yeah.
But these are two really good receivers.
Right. And just pretend you're a genius, Greg. So that's the important thing.
Just a disclaimer, folks, for the sake of time, we don't have time to do 40 receivers. So if we don't talk about the guy from your school, don't get mad at us. Again, we can't talk about everyone. A guy going to Mississippi, because we know they have a D tackle that's going to be going in the first round, most likely.
They have 11 players who are going to be going in the top 50, it feels, Mississippi.
Yeah, they got a lot of players. Trey Harris, Greg, what are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I struggled with him a bit. I mean, he's a big guy, didn't run great. I didn't think he was truly a vertical dimension watching his tape, even though he did do that somewhat at Ole Miss. But then I would watch him and think, God, I think there's more to his game than what we saw on tape. So he was very basic how he was deployed, by the way. He caught a zillion hitches, which of course you almost can throw those plays out. He's not vertically sudden and explosive. He's a little bit one speedish. I don't think he has an extra gear. But he's long. He does have stride length. Maybe he can get on top of corners based on that. I think that whether he can be a vertical dimension will be a big factor in how teams see him. If you don't see him that way, then I don't think you're going to view him as a big-time receiver prospect.
Gotcha.
I would say that he doesn't really have that sort of looseness in his body. He's very linear in his movement. Can he separate and win versus quality NFL man coverage? I don't know the answer to that, but that would be a question that I would have. So I did not love his tape, and I did him last summer as well. So I've seen a lot of him. Would I be surprised if he ended up being a good player? No, but I think to me, there's a lot of potential questions here that, because I don't work for a team, I don't get to do all the due diligence that teams do, but I would really want to do all that due diligence because I think the tape presents questions. I don't want to say he can't, but I think it presents questions.
All right, Greg, we'll move on to TCU's Jack Bech, who, what a year for him. He tragically lost his brother, Tiger, a Princeton football player, in that terrorist attack in New Orleans. Then he wound up catching, I believe, the game-winning touchdown in the Senior Bowl. Jack Bech did. So what are your thoughts on Jack Bech's tape?
He's a fun guy to watch. Really fun guy to watch. Big kid, plays with physicality. I mean, his run after catch, he's mean about it. I mean, this guy, where he's physical, he's competitive. That's a big part of his game. You're not going to see him as a number one. I mean, he does not possess the overall athletic and movement traits to be seen that way, but he has a profile that is really good. Size, 6'1 1/4, 214. Hands, really good. Physicality, competitiveness, run after catch. Again, another guy in some ways, this is not an exact comparison, but in some ways he kind of made me think of Puka Nacua because he's so good run after catch and so physical, but he doesn't have those traits where you go, wow, look at that guy. That guy's just really juicy, and Puka's not that way either. But Bech he's a tough guy not to like when you watch his tape.
Nice.
All right. The next guy that we're going to talk about, a receivers coach put me on this guy because unless you really follow college football, you're probably not familiar with him, particularly if you don't watch the school. But Greg, Pat Bryant's a guy, receivers coach, told me he's one of his favorite receivers for the draft. He didn't time well, but there's something there, as you like to say, Greg, with Pat Bryant.
Yeah, I did him before the combine, and obviously he did not run well. He ran a 4.61. Although his vertical jump was very, very good, which a lot of people view as a measure of athleticism. Bryant is not a sudden dynamic athlete, and that's the thing, you know. So if you're looking for that, he's not your guy. He certainly is not an elite separator, but he showed a nuanced and detailed understanding and feel for route running, pace, tempo, understood it. He played off the leverage of corners really well. And the thing about him at 6'2.25", he went up and got the football. I mean, he's got really good ball tracking skills, great body control, great hand-eye coordination. He makes tough contested catches both in the middle of the field and on the sideline. And because of his size and just the physical nature of the way he plays, he caught a lot of balls between the numbers. And to me, I always look for that because you have to be able to do that in the NFL. His ability to work the middle of the field was really, really good. And I just thought there was a route running savvy to him. There was he understood how to do it. I did him before the combine, and then when I saw the 40 time, I'm thinking, oh, you know, that's going to drop him. But this guy's going to play in the league, Adam, and he's going to be a pretty good player.
Interesting. All right, good stuff. Pat Bryant out of Illinois. Let's go to Colorado State and talk about Tory Horton.
Yeah, Tory Horton was hurt this year. Fortunately, I did watch him last year when he caught 96 balls.
Wow.
But this year he got hurt, only played like 6 games or something along those lines.
Yep.
Didn't play a ton. You know, he's got a sleek, long frame. He's not a physical presence guy, but he's got a lot of stride length to him, which results in build-up speed. You know, so he can be a vertical dimension because he does have that speed. I think he can run by and get on top of corners. He can also stack corners. He understood how to do that. I think he's at his best on what I call movement routes, like crossers, over routes, you know, those kinds of routes that allow him to stride out and run away from coverage. That's what I think he would have to be at the next level. I don't know if this guy, and now we're getting obviously down a bit, you know, as we go through a list of receivers. You know, this guy, to me, is not a wide receiver 1 type. Could he be a boundary X down the road with experience? Maybe, but I don't think that's what he is right now.
Yeah, he had a knee injury. That's why his season was cut short. But he participated in, you know, obviously the combine and his pro day. So now the next guy is big spotlight had been on him because of it's a big time school. That's Isaiah Bond, Greg, from Texas.
Yeah, you know, Isaiah Bond is really interesting because coming off the Alabama season, I think a lot of people thought, you know, he'd go to Texas and you know, he'd be just unbelievable. Like he'd be one of those guys that, you know, just put up huge numbers, and with the kind of speed that he has, you know, that he'd be that guy. But it didn't quite work out that way, you know, and I can't answer exactly why. You know, you never know the answer to those questions. But Isaiah Bond, here's the fascinating thing. His size and athletic testing measurables were almost an exact replica of Jaylen Noel when he came out of Alabama.
Wow.
But Bond's not going to be a top 10 pick. We know that. Yeah. But there's no question he can run. There's no question there are times where the speed looks electrifying. That makes him a vertical dimension. He can win over the top. He's dynamic with the ball in his hands. He was used a ton on tunnel screens. You know, that's a hard way to evaluate a receiver. You don't evaluate a receiver based on what he does on tunnel screens, but it is a part of the game. So he's a guy that I'm just not sure exactly, you know, what he'll be, because there's no question he can run. And he's really good with the ball in his hands. I just don't know. Like I would not see him as a volume receiver early in his career. I always hate to say what a guy could be after year 3, year 4, because you don't know. There's so many variables. but I don't think he'd step in the league as that kind of guy.
All right. I'm also very fascinated to get your tape breakdown on Tez Johnson out of Oregon, Greg.
Yeah. I mean, Tez Johnson is, to me, he's a tough guy to evaluate because he's 156 pounds and he's 5'9.25". You know, and 156 pounds is small. I mean, that just happens to be really small. But, you know, there's a natural quickness to everything he does. He had some run after catch to him. He made defenders miss, and, you know, he navigated the open field well. So there was a playmaking dimension to him with the ball in his hands. It's a discussion, though, in draft meetings. Is 156 okay? What can he be at 156 pounds? I don't want to compare him to Devonta Smith. I'm only saying that because the discussion with Devonta Smith, who's turned out to be a really good player for the Eagles, was obviously his weight. And, you know, he's been able to compensate for that, camouflage it, do whatever to be a really good NFL receiver, but he's also over 6 feet. You know, this kid is 156 and he's 5'9". So I'm not sure. You know, I don't want to say he can't, because I always hate saying that about, you know, kids when they're, you know, coming into the league. Unless I think a guy's tape is just bad. His tape's obviously very good. But I think in draft meetings, guys, wouldn't you agree, they're going to be discussing this? He's 156 pounds.
Because you got to run. Like, I know, you know, from talking to scouts, he runs better than his 40 times. 40 times poor at 4.51 for his size. You would think guy would be blazing.
Yeah.
Like Tutu Atwell who was clearly overdrafted.
Yeah, he had a blazing 40
but
times.
he could run. He could run. Now, there's just saying in scouting sometimes small guys play small, and you don't want that. And that's always a concern, Jeff, as we send it back to you. But this is a kid who, by the way, who grew up with Bo Nix.
Yeah.
Story. Yeah, really cool story. But So look, he's. I expect him to get drafted. It's probably going to be late. But again, the thing that, as the receivers coach told me about him, boy, there's something there with him, as Greg likes to say. Like, he can run, but that 40 time threw me for a loop though at the combine. That's not 4.51 is not going to help him.
In the games I watched, I couldn't help but think, Greg, that he was, I don't want to call him a product of the scheme, but he might be a scheme-specific type player.
Well, I think that's a fair statement, Jeff.
Yeah, very good in their RPO game and getting him in space open.
You have to make a concerted effort to manufacture him in your offense.
Right.
You know, you just can't line him up and say, let's go play ball.
Right.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right, Jeff. You know, which, again, he can still be a factor in your offense, but, you know, we'll see. I mean, he's a fun guy to watch because he just has a certain quickness to him, and, you know, he's just fun. But, you know, again, he's really small.
All right, we'll finish it up. We'll go to Utah State, the Utes, and talk. Oh, no, Utah State is not the Utes. That's Utah, right? Utah State is the I forget who Utah State is, but they have a good wide receiver named Jaylen Noel. So let's talk about him. Yeah,
he's a really interesting guy too. Now, he ran really well at the combine, but he doesn't play exactly like 4.42. Mm-hmm. But he's a really solidly built guy. I mean, he looks it on tape. He's 6 feet 205. I felt watching him, he's so controlled and calculated in his movement. I mean, I felt like he really understood how to run routes, how to beat coverage, whether he was beating man or whether he was beating zone. He has a really wide catch radius, really good body control. I think he's strong run after catch. I mean, he's really competitively tough. He's got just enough wiggle to make defenders miss at times. I liked him. I mean, I don't think he's a boundary X. I think he's more of a movement Z kind of guy, maybe a slot guy. I mean, that's the way I saw him. I think he can work the middle of the field really well, and he can give you, yards after catch. There's a physical presence to his game. The more I watched him, the guy I thought of, and I think this guy would have had a phenomenal year if he didn't get hurt early in the season. The guy I thought of, and again, just for people that maybe they're listening for the first time, I don't sit around and say, who does a guy remind me of as I watch a guy? They either remind me of someone or they don't. The guy he reminded me of was Rashee Rice coming out of SMU in 2023. Physical guy, not a true burner. Because like I said, Royals the tape does not say 4.42.
Got it. All right, you know what? One just popped in my head real quick before we got Keandre Lambert-Smith, only because obviously he started his career at Penn State, and I felt like he was victimized by quarterback play, but then he went to Auburn. Did you get to see Keandre?
I did not, but I spoke to a coach who absolutely loves him, and I'm going to watch him. I spoke to a coach who's been in the league for years, an offensive coach, obviously, who just loves him. But when I say loves him, he's not telling me he's a top 10 pick. Right. But I want to watch him. I just haven't gotten to him yet because so many other positions I had to do. I'm trying to think.
He ran well, by the way. 4.37.
Yeah, he was a burner.
I'm just going to look right now just at the list of receivers and a list of receivers to see if there's someone that, let's see.
Felton also.
Guy that's fascinating. That's really fast. There's a couple of guys, but the guy who's really fascinating is the Dante Thornton kid from Tennessee.
Okay.
Because he was I think he started at Oregon, if I'm not mistaken. And he transferred to Tennessee. I'm just checking that because let's see. Yes, he was a top 100 recruit in the nation coming out of Baltimore, began his career at Oregon. He spent 2 seasons before transferring to Tennessee. And the reason why I mentioned him is he's 6'5", 205, and ran a 4.3.
Wow. Yeah.
Which is ridiculous. Now, obviously, he didn't put up huge numbers at Tennessee in terms of number of catches. He did lead the nation in yards per reception with over 25, but he only had 26 receptions. But when you see a guy 6'5" run like that, and the tape tells you that he runs like that, and I remember seeing him at Oregon and just noting him, just like somebody, the guy who asked me last night about, when I watch tape, do I notice other players? And I remember noticing Deontay Thornton at Oregon, the size, the stride length, the speed, and he caught balls in the middle of the field. I mean, his hands were not bad at all. I'm just wondering if he's a guy that there's more to come at the next level. I don't know that, but, I felt that when I finished watching his tape.
What's funny, Jeff, is that he's a guy he played 4 years. Okay. Not a lot. He didn't have a season with more than 26 catches.
I know.
It's kind of like, in a way, Jaylen Hunt. If you're going to draft him as early as the 3rd round, it's about the projection. Okay, in 3 years, we're going to put mass on his frame, and eventually we think he could be a good player for us because he's probably not going to play early, barring something unforeseen.
He's a projection.
But, it's a total projection. But the measurables in terms of speed, length, you bring them somewhere where you could just bring them along slowly, but there's clearly something there, and you cannot teach size and ability to move.
You cannot teach the way he runs like that. Right. I mean, at 6'5", and that shows up on tape, by the way.
4.340, Jeff. 4.3. It's 6'4" and 5'8". Holy smokes!
This just conversation reminds me of a couple of years ago, Greg, when we kind of asked you who are some guys that maybe we didn't throw that you liked, and you went to Tennessee and brought up, I believe, Josh Palmer.
Oh, yeah. I did.
Yeah. And then one other Anthony Schwartz too that we thought he could run a little
bit.
Yeah,
he never panned out. Go ahead. You got
one other guy that I found really interesting, and I'm curious to see how he's deployed in the NFL. Is Ty Felton out of Maryland?
Yeah,
caught 96 balls this year, I believe. Yeah. Led the Big Ten in receptions. Mm-hmm. He's got great route quickness. I mean, he's long, doesn't weigh a lot. Ran a 4.37. He's got great route quickness through his vertical stem. Really good separation quickness at the top of the route stem. Really good hands. Really good hands. Unlike many track speed fast guys, he played to his time speed. I mean, you saw it on tape. I thought his combination of natural quickness and shiftiness, deceptively tough too. Really good contact balance with the ball in his hands. I found him really intriguing. I'm really curious to see where he gets drafted, who drafts him. I think he could be an ascending player in the NFL, depending on all those other factors.
Yeah, the last 2 years at Maryland is really the first 2 quiet, but particularly this last season, he's a guy that he could be an NFL starter within the first 2 years. It just depends where you're drafted. That was a guy that, in our initial list, it's like, okay, we only have so much time and so many guys, but I'm glad you mentioned him. He was on my list. We just didn't get to him. So good. There you go.
Yeah, I remember Andrew DeCecco checking him out at Maryland's Pro Day and calling him one of the more under-discussed guys too.
Yeah, he's a very interesting guy. So, I mean, we could go on forever, but that's
good.
That's good. Nice. Good
There's
list.
always going to be wide receivers in every draft.
Absolutely. All right, that is going to wrap up our breakdown with Greg on these 2025 NFL Draft wide receiver prospects. A nice big group, and it'll be interesting to see where they all go. For Greg Cosell and Adam Kaplan, I'm Jeff Mosher. You've been watching the Intel with Greg Cosell.